Now, stay tuned to Vinyl Community Podcasts.
What's going on, buddies? Concert Buddy, back here on Vinyl Community Podcasts. I've got a good one for you. I'm already going to call it. I wouldn't have any of that weak stuff here on the podcast, and this one's definitely not going to be that. I am joined by Mark Anthony K. If you are familiar with the Vinyl Community, air quotes, on YouTube, I'm sure you've seen him around the community, on Patrick, PB Thal stream, Rachel's Go Show. You're all over the place, Plus, there's a lot more to you than that, and we'll kind of get into it. So, Mark, thanks for joining us.
Hey, how's it going? I'm really happy to be here, Chance. I'm glad to be on your show.
Awesome. I'm glad you can make it. You actually, for those scoring closely at home, Mark was kind enough to join us not too long ago for our second edition of the KISS Roundtable. He was highly suggested by a mutual friend, Vance, over in Chicago, EK. And I was glad we could make that connected because I had seen him on different, again, programs. We'll kind of get into that stuff, but didn't know that he was the KISS FAQ podcast, like KISS. So it was great to have him on there as I was learning and still learning about KISS the band. So anyway, well, let's just dive in right there. So like I said, in the open here, I've seen you in different areas in the vinyl community, again, air quotes. How did you find, because you're a musician, you've got a lot going on, we're going to get into that. But how did you find the vinyl community on YouTube and just jump right in there?
Actually, it's kind of interesting because I got into going on the internet and doing stuff like that when I discovered these KISS podcasts, because I was a fan and a watcher of the KISS FAQ podcast from the very beginning. I think episode 2, I was already kind of watching it, and became a longtime watcher. And then they kept saying, why don't you come on up? Because they started wanting other people to come on up at that time because they didn't have a regular crew of people on there, right? So I went up there, and I've been on there since episode 33. And tomorrow, ironically enough, we're having our live 500th episode of the KISS FAQ podcast celebration. So nice. I've been on there for quite a while now, and it's been, a very fun and enjoyable thing. Now, what ended up happening is when I started watching these kind of different podcasts afterwards, I started looking around to see if there's other KISS ones. And then I started getting into collecting vinyl because of the KISS connection, because as you know, the KISS community is all about collecting vinyl, like, bootlegs, all kinds of stuff. Sure. There's so many variations. I went down that rabbit hole. Like I have like 11 variations of KISS Unmasked, the album. I have like 15 variations of like Rock and Roll Over. It's insane how much I got into that. But I started finding other channels of interest. For example, Patrick had a channel long before he turned into the vinyl archivist, where he was known as I think it was something like Patrick's Neighborhood or something like that. He had like an interesting different title for his channel. And he did a roundtable shootout on Close to the Edge on that album, like different variations of it. And that's where I started getting into the whole vinyl community thing. And I think Patrick was one of the first people I actually connected with. And then shortly after that, I discovered Rachel's channel. She was doing her live streams, and you know how it is. Once you go on Rachel's channel once or twice, then you're hooked forever, right? So
sure.
Yeah.
That's funny. So we're talking about record collecting. So had you collected vinyl before this kind of gateway into the KISS bootlegs and all the variants and all that kind of stuff? Tell us about that.
Well, but back when I was in one of my earliest bands, I had a pretty decent vinyl collection because my older sister, she was right into collecting vinyl, and she's a big person as far as my influence or influencing me for music and stuff. Like she introduced me to some of my earliest bands that I got into, like Rush and KISS, and all those kinds of bands from the 70s. And I when I started collecting this stuff, but at that point I wasn't so hardcore into it. I was just collecting it because I liked the music and I was listening to it. Sure. And then as one of my bands that I was in started getting more popular, we got connected with this guy who was a journalist at the time. His name was Adrian Bromley. He has passed away, unfortunately, but he was a writer for these big magazines in Toronto, like Unrestrained and Brave Words, Bloody Knuckles, and all these magazines that were popular around Toronto area. And he helped us get our first record deal. And when he did that, I decided that as a thank you to him, I would give him some of my vinyl albums because he was a vinyl collector. Like, he was hardcore already then. Like, this is the 90s, okay? And so I don't really regret doing it, but I did give him quite a lot of my records at that point. And now looking back at it, I wish I didn't give him some of the ones that I gave him, because I had a pretty good collection
You gave
of stuff.
some good stuff, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I gave him like first pressings of, like, Justice for All and all these other albums I had.
And
so
we're gonna have to take a station break or something. I don't know if I can recover from that.
So I gave him a lot of stuff that was pretty good stuff to have now. But at that point, I didn't think twice about it, because at that point I was really gunning to get a record deal in my band, and we wanted to go out and start touring and playing, and it did help, right, to get that, and he was a big part of that. So now fast forward years later, I got the bug again to collecting vinyl, but that was the origins was way back then in the 90s, actually, when vinyl was pretty much a dead issue.
Nice. Cool. So you kind of hit on a little bit there about being a musician, and I probably did a terrible job of kind of bearing the lead there. But but the real reason, and one of the big reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is, and again, seeing you in different places, I had heard the name Projekt Gemineye. I'd heard you're a musician, but I hadn't really put two to two together, right? I think, matter of fact, I think for your last release, I think it was What Lies Beyond in the spring. I think I was even watching Rachel's one morning, and it was AGK or somebody was with you. Tell me if I've got this wrong. And there was an unboxing or something. Maybe it was just AGK unboxing it. Maybe he got it and he was so excited. Somebody was unboxing the record, and then I was like, okay, so Mark, who I've seen on the Patrick live streams, is part of Projekt Gemineye, blah blah blah. So anyway, so you talked about let's just kind of jump into your musical background as a musician, because and we'll get into the Projekt Gemineye stuff. There's a lot there, a lot of output, and a lot of creative stuff. What made you want to pick up an instrument or become a musician? Like, walk us through that kind of walk as you're a young fella there in Ontario. I believe you're from Ontario. Is that right?
Yeah.
So you're a young guy in Ontario, got some records. You like, I mean, there's a lot going on, and you just pick up that first instrument. Tell us about it.
So the funny thing was how I discovered the guitar is actually completely by accident, because my sister, my older sister, again, Jane, she got a guitar when she was younger, and she took about 2 or 3 lessons, and it wasn't for her, and they put the guitar away and buried it underneath the stairs of our house there, and it was collecting dust. I was playing soccer for a long time at this point, and my father was my coach at that time, and he told me to go down to the basement to get something. I think it was like a bag of like extra soccer balls for our practice. I went down there, and while I was looking for the stuff, I stumbled across this case underneath the steps. I was like, what the hell is this? I opened it, and it was a Les Paul copy, and one of those really good ones, like those Japanese made ones that they got sued over, that were so almost exact, right? And I was like, hey, there's a guitar here. And right away, it kind of clicked to me, because, I like, Kiss with Ace Frehley, and Alex Lifeson played a Les Paul too. So I was like, hey, and I pulled it out. And when I came back from the practice, I started looking at it, and there was an old 1969 style, instructional book in there, like how to, this is the E string, this is the F note, and So I started going through there, and I picked up the guitar, and I started self-teaching myself, and I got the bug, and it got to the point where I was sitting in my room for like 7.5 hours a day, every day, playing guitar, and I just dove into it, and I just loved it. And then by the time I was 16. I formed my first band with some of my high school buddies, and we actually took it really seriously. We were 60, what did we know? But we were already dreaming about big things at that point. And there was a little recording studio here in Brampton where I lived, just outside of Toronto, and that did like 16-track recording at that time. So we wrote a couple of songs, and we went in there and we recorded. So we already had like a little demo tape at 16 years old at that time. It's nothing to write home about, believe me. It's pretty terrible, but but it was a first step, right?
Right, of course.
Yeah. So we ended up working on that, and then from there it just grew. Like I started another band later on. I was we at that point we were mainly just playing in local areas around here, and then as I got more and more serious with it, I ended up joining forming another band at that time called Reckon with One, and that was the band I got that record deal with. And we toured Canada like 2-3 times, and we played all over the place. We did lots of festivals. We played with all kinds of bands, like Strapping Young Lad and Nevermore, and all kinds of bands from America, like these heavy thrash bands and stuff like that. And it was great. Overkill and Sonata Arctic, all kinds of bands we played with, and it went really good. And then we were together for about 9 years, and then the singer guy, the bass player singer, he decided he wanted to become a police officer. So then the band ended up splitting up, right? And then after that happened, something really big happened for me, is I ended up joining this band called the Exalted Pile Driver. Now, I'm not sure how much you know about 80s metal, but there was a band in the 80s called Pile Driver.
Yes, I've heard the name.
Yeah, and that was him, Gord, and
okay.
He was the one who was. So technically, here's a little just quick backstory about that band. That band was not really a band; it was just Gord and another guy, a guitar player, and it was like a fake band. But they released an album through Cobra and some other labels in the United States, and it got big. At last count, the rumor is, because there's a big problem with him getting royalties from these labels, but the last count was that album suspectedly sold almost 500,000 copies of that album.
Not too shabby, yeah.
Yeah, and he did another record as well after it called Stay Ugly, not Stay Hungry, Stay Ugly, and it's and that did pretty good as well.
I need to cross that off my autobiography names because I don't want to get sued. I had Stay Ugly as probably my leading contender for my autobiography, so I'm going to cross that off the list right now. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay. But, and then that band never toured. It was just an entity that went to the studio and released records. Now, in the 2000s, he decided to actually form a proper band and go out and tour, because when the internet started happening, he realized that there was a huge underground following for Pile Driver at that time. Right. Sure. Okay. So he got a band together. They started playing a bit. And then, some of the people didn't work out. And then one day I got an email from their management saying, would you like to come and try out for the rhythm guitar player position at that time? And I was like, okay, because I don't know how they found out that my band had split at that time, but the manager obviously did his due diligence and found out. And then he contacted me right away. And I contacted Gord, and we had a 2-hour conversation on the phone about Frank Zappa and all these other kind of music things. And we connected immediately. So I went over there, grabbed some stuff from him to learn some demos. And long story short, I got in the band. And not only did I get into the band, but the drummer for my band that I had just split up with, I got him in as well because he didn't like the drummer that he had at the time as well then. So it was a 2-for-1 kind of deal there. And
so this is like Buckingham Nicks all over again.
Yeah, exactly. Totally like that. And what ended up happening too was that it originally was 2 guitar players. So it was me and another guy, but the other guitar player didn't end up working. So it ended up just being a 4-piece with me doing all the guitar stuff. And it was honestly one of the best times of my life because we did a big record. We went to Metalworks Studios here in Toronto and recorded a full record. And we played all over the United States, all over Canada, and we did a great tour of Europe. We went to Greece and Germany and all kinds of stuff. And it was incredible to do it because, we met a lot of people, a lot of the type 40-year-old leather jackets with the patches on the back and stuff like that. But these guys, when they came to the shows, I remember yesterday, I think it was a couple of Polish guys who came to one of our shows in Germany. He came up to us and goes, "Are you guys in Pile Driver?" Because we wore masks, so they didn't know who we were exactly.
Oh, okay.
Right? We had masks on and all these really decrepit, kind of decayed T-shirts that were supposed to look like zombies, and he was like our zombie cult guy, right? And when they found out that we were in Pile Driver, I saw grown men, 45-year-old men, crying. Because they never thought that they would see Pile Driver in their lifetime, and they brought their records and they had to sign it, and they were shaking, holding these records, could you please sign it? I didn't realize how big this band was in Europe, right? So I took it pretty seriously that we made sure all our shows are well performed and stuff like that, because some of these people told me that they were waiting their whole life to see this band, so that's kind of big responsibility,
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
So after that happened. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, no, I was just going to say, so how long were you in that band and where else did that go?
I was in that band for about 5-6 years. After that, near the end of that, Gord started having a little bit of health problems at that time. And it wasn't feasible to continue in that way because we were supposed to do another tour of Europe at that point, but we didn't feel comfortable doing it because he was having, I don't know if it was anxiety issues or something like that, but when we would go on stage, he would sometimes like completely freeze up and he would like puke on stage, and he would almost black out, right? So it was something that we didn't feel comfortable with, and our bass player at the time even said, he goes, "Gord, I'm scared that if we were to go overseas now like this, that we would bring you back in a cardboard box, like that we didn't want to do that, right?" So the band ended up splitting for a while, and then he got a couple other people and he continued later on, and that was great. I was happy that he continued later on. But from that point on, I started thinking about reforming my old band. Long story short, I started working with a couple of people, but then I broke my leg, like a bad break. I broke my femur bone, which I'm not sure if you know enough about the human body, but the femur bone is the strongest and hardest bone in the body to break.
Right. Yeah.
And if it breaks, then it's pain, like real pain.
Well, how did you do this? How did you break your leg?
Apparently, what ended up happening, we kind of had to do some investigative work on this, because I had pain in my leg for about a week or two before it happened. But the doctors, when they checked the x-ray, said it looked like I had a hairline fracture in the femur for a long time, like almost half a year. So I must have... The last thing I thought of was, I remember I went up on a stage and I jumped off the edge of it and jumped onto the ground for a second. And when I landed awkward, I felt like a little pain in my leg, but I never thought anything of it. And that must have been when the hairline happened, right? And I never got it checked out. And then one day I just took an awkward step out the front door, and I heard it snap. It literally sounded like a branch when it snapped, right? And when the ambulance guys came, it was unbelievable, because they came to me after when I was sedated in the room, and they said they just wanted to see if I was okay. And I said, "Yeah, I'm okay." And he goes, "Dude," "are you in a band?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm a guitar player." He goes, "You should seriously think about doing vocals, because you had one of the loudest voices I've ever heard when you were screaming in the ambulance." So that goes to show you how painful that episode was. But that situation ended up spawning the start of Projekt Gemineye, because when I was in the hospital bed there thinking what I was going to do, I completely split my other band that I had started at the time, and I just wanted to just start from scratch over again. I wanted to do something by myself, because I was kind of getting fed up with working with other people when you work with them and you ask for them to work on lyrics, or you ask for them to work on something, and it's always some delay or some problem, and it was always it took forever to do stuff sometimes with people. So I just decided, I'm going to just do it all myself and see how it goes. And I ended up doing pretty good. I ended up writing quite a few albums.
This is while you're in the hospital. You're writing music while you're in the hospital.
I was outlining it at that point. Right, I was kind of figuring out.
Were you still heavily sedated? Because I want to understand the influence of any kind of mind.
I thought about it like right from those early times. Like I thought to myself, that whole concept of what happened was the basis of two of my records, An Ordinary Day and A Brand New Day, because An Ordinary Day tells about me that day when I broke my leg and what happened, and then the next album, A Brand New Day, kind of looks at me being in hospital and getting like rehabbing to get out of the hospital, and the end of the album was I'm finally out and starting my life all over again, because it took me, I was in hospital for almost 3.5 months. That's how bad it was. Like I couldn't walk for the first while. Like I was bedridden because I couldn't even get up and stand. It was such a bad break, right? So I had to learn to re-walk again, and it was terrible. But that led to the Projekt Gemineye thing, and as you know, I've been writing nonstop pretty much since I started doing that.
Well, and those two albums, they came out, if I'm not mistaken, in the same year, right? So Ordinary Day was your first studio album, and we'll get a little bit into Projekt Gemineye stuff deeper here in a second. And then A Brand New Day was at the end of the year in October, right?
Yeah.
Nice. So talking about Projekt Gemineye, for folks who don't know, one, highly recommend, as your humble host here did, Bandcamp is where it's at. Because if you want to deep dive on the band, Bandcamp is where it's at. But we'll get into that too. But tell us about, how would you describe it for somebody who's new or just hearing about it, like me, talking to me here, Mark?
Yeah.
Your kind of influences, because I guess the easy way to say is it's probably heavily influenced by progressive rock. Is that safe to say?
Yeah.
So what
definitely.
kind of bands? So I'm thinking like Yes, or I'm thinking like Dream Theater, or I'm thinking Course Rush, right? I mean, that goes without saying, but I don't know, King Crimson. Like, what were the influences that kind of shaped the direction of Project Gemini?
It's funny, you almost hit on all the ones that I always refer to when I talk about Project Gemini, because I always tell people that when I try to describe what Project Gemini is, it's like Yes meets Rush meets Dream Theater in a dark alley and then gets beat up by Pantera. That's kind of how
I almost had it. I just saw the boys of Pantera too. That's my bad. I should have got that.
Yeah. So I mean, the Pantera kind of comes in with the double kick stuff and some of the heavier elements.
Yeah, I understand.
So but I mean, you're definitely very, very close to all the influences that are in there. So yeah, good ear, my friend. Good ear.
Excellent. No, yeah, I was listening again. Do a little homework on the show, and it's hard to believe, but I do a little homework because I want to understand the guests and understand what we're going to talk about. But so we talked about the origins. You start the band. Was the idea to just make music and see where it goes, or did you have like a plan, I wouldn't say a business plan, but at least a roadmap of what you wanted to do? You wanted to make the music, you wanted to tour on it. Tell us about those early days.
At that point, I wanted to just write music and record it and put it out. As we hinted on before, I was big on collecting vinyl at the time. I was also still am a very big supporter of the CD medium. I think CDs are very underlooked and underappreciated right now, and I think that they're going to make a comeback. You wait. They're going to make a big comeback.
You heard it here. Hey, they're still at thrift stores, relatively cheap. Now's the time to buy up.
Yeah, now is the time because you watch. But I'm telling you, when I started doing this, my biggest goal was I wanted to make a record by myself, put it out on CD and on vinyl. That was my main goal, and that was the thing that I have done for every release that I've done so far, like a full-length release, right? And I've always thought about going back and playing live again, because I had played live nonstop since I was like 17 years old. So I've been doing it for so long that I was okay with kind of having a little bit of a break from it for a little while.
Sure.
But, I always kind of tell people whenever I do or have a chance to do interviews like this, that 2024 might be the year that I might decide to actually do it, because now I have quite a few people that, I've become friends with over the internet and stuff like that. And a lot of people who are, really competent musicians and people that I, would trust in that situation, like Joe Bailey. He's a great bass player and vocalist, and he sang on my records and he played bass on them. So he would be ideal to be a bass player and one of the singers, including myself, right? Mm-hmm. Also David Donnelly, who's a fantastic musician who can play drums and can play guitar. I would probably pick him as a second guitar with me, right? Like a rhythm guitar, and have him play. And I know he would do it in a heartbeat. He's told me that several times already. It would just be a matter of scoping out maybe a drummer, and I have a few people in mind. And of course, I'd probably need one, maybe two keyboard players, because we have a lot of keyboards in our stuff. Yeah. But it's possible. And the thing is, one of the places that Project Gemini seems to do very well as far as getting play on, radio or internet radio or even legitimate radio, believe it or not, is in the UK, right? So, and luckily David and Joe both are in the UK. So if anything, I would probably decide, if I was to start playing again, I would probably work out a little plan where I would go over to the UK for a month or so, practice with those guys for a week or so, and then go out and play some gigs for like 2-3 weeks with them in the UK, right? And I think that is very, very plausible and very possible to do. So, but lots of things have to also happen in between then as well. So, but you heard it here; it may happen.
Hey, listen, it's like the minimalists. I read a lot of their books, and they talk about it's either day one or one day. You decide. So you heard it here first. It's going to be up to Mark. It's going to be either one day or day one. So we had kind of talked about this before we got started, but as I was kind of traversing the Project Gemini output, up to 7 studio albums now. The latest was What Lies Beyond in April, correct?
Yes.
And so in that journey, clearly, a couple things became very clear to this outsider. And one thing I want to ask you about is, where does the creativity come from? Because the output is consistent. Sometimes it's 2 albums a year, some EPs, all this kind of stuff. But where do you really hone in on the creativity? Because you talked about, I think it's probably our little pregame huddle, being passionate about it. Is that where it is? It's a natural byproduct of just picking up the guitar and just kind of noodling and going from there. Like, where does the creativity strike you?
It's a lot of things, but mainly what it is that I love playing guitar. That's one of the main things that I just love picking up the guitar, plugging in and just playing. But the other thing that's very important as well, and this might sound sort of like duh with saying this, but you wouldn't believe how people don't think about this, is that I love listening to lots of music. Well, I have a channel that I frequent on YouTube called Progline, Progline, and this guy finds obscure prog rock and progressive metal albums that maybe only did like 100 copies, or maybe only had one release and then disappeared off the face of the earth. And he finds these records and uploads them, gets the vinyl and records them and puts them online.
Sure.
And I've found so many bands on here that were like I'd never heard of, and when I refer to them to other people, they're like, I've never heard of that band before. And I just listening to some of these records were just fascinating. Like, just so many great prog rock bands that never, got the spotlight on them. But listening to some of this music instantly sometimes sparks an idea to me. When I listen to some of their music, I'm like, wow, that's such a great album. That's such a great song. And I'll go and sit down, and all of a sudden I'll start playing and songs will come to me. Now, it's not the same music that they were playing, because I tend to make sure I don't want to listen to a record and then copy their ideas. You know what I mean? Like that's obviously something you don't want to do, right?
This isn't like American Idol where you're taking something and making it your own. It's more of an inspirational point, like a launching point. Like you hear something, maybe it starts as that, and then the embers become a fire and become what you ultimately make.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the thing is, back in the day, when I was in some of my other bands, we had a tendency of writing 4 or 5 minute songs. But because I got into like progressive rock so deeply, I find that I have a tendency now of writing 8-minute songs more often, 9-minute songs, 10 minutes. I mean, I even had like a 14-minute song before on one of my records. And I think on my latest one here, I have one that's 14 minutes and 45 seconds and one that's 11 minutes and 37 seconds. That's the latest one here, What Lies Beyond, right? Yep. And if you look in the back there, there's some pretty lengthy songs on there.
Yeah,
right?
there's only 5 tracks, but they're pretty substantial length, right?
Yeah. So I love that era. I always told my mom, I go, it's too bad that I wasn't born 10 years before that I was, because doing music in the 70s would have been ideal, because that's the kind of music that I enjoy, that kind of 70s progressive rock stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Just for me, the inspiration comes musically from listening to lots of different music, and because it gets all logged up in here, right? And you just there's certain things that I like about certain kinds of music, like some of the interplay between keyboards and guitar, between drums and bass, some of the interplay between it, and that kind of rubs off on some of the writing as well, right? And lyrically, my influences have always been what happens in the world. What surrounds me is what influences me, I find. As far as lyric writing goes, I mean, Neil Peart has always been a huge influence on me. Same with Peter Gabriel and people like that, where they don't just write about screwing girls and partying all night. They write about stuff that's actually it doesn't have to be deep and heavy and always cry me a river kind of stuff, but I like to write stuff that has some sort of message to it.
Makes sense. Are you the type, like I'd read or I'd heard, that like Kurt Hammock from Metallica for a long time was, with the advent of the iPhone, is he had to have like a creative moment, a lick or a riff or something, and he'd record it. And well, 2-parter. Do you do something similar? And the second part of that is because he ultimately lost his phone and was all to hell because he had all this music, all this creativity things that he had. Again, creativity strikes at very inopportune times sometimes, and he had all this music and he then lost it. So do you employ a similar method? And if you do, you got to back up. I was going to ask.
For the first couple of records, ironically enough, I did. On my other Android phone that I have, they have like a little, sound recorder thing, right? And I just many times I turned it on and have just grabbed my acoustic guitar when an idea came to me, and I would just play the little part on there and record it 30 seconds or whatever, and I would go back to it and listen to it, and a lot of the times it developed into songs. Usually now what I end up doing instead of doing that is, because I have my little recording studio right here, where this is where I've done all my records now.
Right.
And I have a really convenient setup now where if an idea comes to me now, it's just a matter of me grabbing one chord, plugging in here, turning on my Pro Tools, and I'm ready to record. And I use that as sort of my way to record ideas. I just go on there and I might have just like one open file where it's just nothing but ideas, like 30 seconds here, 20 seconds here, 10 seconds here. And it might even be a bass part. It may even be a keyboard part, or something, just anything that, or an idea strikes me. Like the last record that I was just working on, because I have another 2 or 3 Projekt Gemineye albums done already, fully recorded and mixed. Okay, that'll be coming out next year, that are already done. But a lot of them started with piano. Like an idea came to me on piano. I would play it, record it, leave it, come back the next day, listen to it, add to it, and lo and behold, in a day or two, I have enough parts for a fully constructed song. And so I don't kind of limit myself with just saying, okay, the ideas have to come from a guitar. It can come from anything. It can come from keyboards, bass, guitar. And even it's happened once where I had drum part ideas and I would construct a part, just put it on the computer real quick and come back to it. And that drum part will instantly give me an idea for a guitar part to go with it. So the influence, the inspiration for this comes from many different places.
Is it easier to ask what instruments you don't play versus the instruments you do play? Because again, when I was going through the Bandcamp stuff, I saw a lot of it was your name in a lot of places, right? And obviously you'd mentioned like Joe Bailey and David Allen. So there are other people helping you contribute, but it sounds like a one-man shop in a lot of regards. Is that safe to say? Yeah,
I mean, pretty much everything that I need to make a record, I can do. The drums, the drum part of it, I do through a program called Easy Drummer 2. And what the great thing about that is, and I've explained this a few times on Patrick's live stream, because he's fascinated by this, because he always said that when he listens to the drums, he's like, I would never believe that this is a programmed drum thing. And it's not really a programmed drum thing. What it is it's a program done by this company called TuneTrack. And they go to like these world professional big studios. They hire these world-renowned drummers like John Tempesta and all these guys, like from Testament or from a Lamb of God or whoever. They'll get their drum sets in, record their actual drum kits, okay, and you get the program where you have their actual drum kit, okay, and they go in and they play drum parts and they record them. So what it basically is that they'll do like 17 or let's say 20 different variations of a verse part. And then they'll do 50 or 60 variations of a drum fill, different kinds of drum fills, and then different, chorus parts and different pre-chorus parts. And what you do is you take this part, you listen to your, you'll play something and you'll say, okay, let me try this drum part. Will it fit with my guitar part? Okay, it works good. I'm going to use it. Now you find a drum fill, you edit it, put it in. It's a long process. It's not something that can be done in 5 minutes. But if you take your time, listen to what you're doing, and cut all those pieces in properly, it sounds so good. People, like I said, lots of people don't even know that it's not an actual drummer.
No, listen, as somebody who was deep diving as late as this morning on some of this stuff, I wouldn't have known. I would have thought some of it was studio work, to be honest with you, because it finishes that clean. So I would have had no idea that this is literally like I'm picturing like the Matrix. You're putting all these pieces together, but it's kind of like that, right? And technology really helped kind of be able to shorten that creative divide of having to wait on a drummer and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that what people find interesting about that is that because it's a real drummer playing it, the difference between that and what people do by themselves, like when they program their own drums, it's very stiff. It's really like do 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 when people program it. But these guys, because they're real drummers, they have like more finesse to it. They do a lot of ghost notes and they do all these little things that drummers do that people who are not drummers would never think of doing. right? The way they play on their hi-hat or the way they play on their ride cymbals. And because you have those kind of patterns available to you, you put them on, and that makes the drumming sound so realistic, right?
Nice. When you're talking about earlier, you'll start a song, you'll finish a song, and you've got. Is it a matter of how do you kind of form what songs go where for an album, right? Like you were talking about, your first two albums kind of went together.
Yeah.
Some of your later albums, you had the in the year 3073 book 1, 2, and 3, right? So you have a lot of like long-term planning. So there you go. So there is a degree of kind of structure and how you want to lay these out. Is it as simple? Am I being too simple about it? Like you'll have a song and then you're literally just trying to structure what album or whatever theme that album is going to be. This is a good place for that song, or is it sometimes there's something that hits you and you want to create a song for that theme? How does it work?
Okay, so let me give you a good example. So I have this album here, which is the third record I made, which is Man of Science, Man of Dreams.
Right.
Okay. This album was just basically songs that I just wrote. Like I was just writing songs. An idea came, I wrote them. And the connective tissue on this album is that they're all pretty much songs based around science. And when I refer to Man of Science, Man of Dreams, I refer to my dad, my late father. He was a scientist guy. He was always working in the basement with magnetics and all kinds of experimentations with stuff. So he was very much an influence on the topical matter of this album. All right. So the musically, they just came to me. I had no plan specifically for the music, but once it came to writing the lyrics, that's where they all kind of interconnected, because I wrote them all around the idea of my dad and his kind of scientific work and just science in general. You know what I mean? Like how science can affect, people's lives and stuff like that. Now, when we get to in the year 3073, as you can see, this is book 1, right? Mm-hmm. This I went in with a grandiose idea from the very beginning, because I knew I wanted to write a concept record, and This is a 3-part one. This is book 1, there's book 2 and book 3, right? Book 2 I actually have here, ironically, on vinyl form here.
There you go. Right? All right. Yep.
So, and this is a full-fledged story. Basically, the story in a nutshell is people end up leaving the planet, and let's say, I think it was 3050 or something like that. They end up leaving the planet because, atmosphere decaying and stuff like that. And they leave. A group of people leave, like highly touted people, scientists and scholars and stuff like that. They leave and go to repopulate another planet. They go to look for one. 100 years later, their offspring later on decide to want to come back and see what happened to planet Earth. They return to planet Earth and realize that planet Earth didn't, in fact, go to hell in a handbasket. In fact, it turned into a paradise on Earth. So they're like, what the hell happened when we left, So that's the whole story of it. Now, my whole inspiration to this, and I don't know how much you follow prog rock concept albums, but every progressive rock band or metal band in the last 10 years always has the same concept. Earth is going to blow up. Earth is going to it's always some dystopian thing. And it's always how man must recreate Earth. So I said, you know what? I'm so sick of that story. I go, why don't I just do one that's totally opposite? People leave and they come back and realize that nothing bad happened to it, that everything went good. And we were like, what the hell? Why did we leave? Everything is so perfect. Like even the pictures I got my guy James McCarthy to do, like you see like water falls and all these beautiful happening. They're like, what the hell happened? We left and now it looks it's better than it was when we were here.
Nirvana. It became Nirvana when we got these pesky assholes off the plane.
Exactly. So, and if you follow the story, then you'll see what happens like within it, because it goes over 3 books, so 3 albums, right? And it's a little bit more, it gets into a little bit more detail than what I just said, but it's basically that's the story, right?
Well, you kind of helping me out here, because one thing I wanted to talk to you about is the art, because all the art I'm assuming was done by, you said James McCarthy, right? Is that pretty, because all the art on all the studio albums that I saw, the full length LPs look to be the same. So I jumped into conclusions here. So how did you get connected with James? And it must be a good relationship, because you went back to him here 7 times, right? Or more.
Yeah. pardon me. The story of James McCarthy is actually really interesting, fascinating, and I know when I've said it once before that people always find it very interesting. James McCarthy is a painter. He lives in Florida, Tampa Bay area, I believe it is.
Yeah, I would have guessed and said this is another one of them Canadian boys. And you're you're keeping it all north of the border. You're keeping it. Yeah.
No, he's a Floridian. Okay,
right.
And he's been doing it for a very, very long time. Now, when I started working on Projekt Gemineye stuff, and this was still in hospital days, I went online and I was looking at this site called DeviantArt. I'm sure you must have heard of it. Where people put up their artwork. It's like a Facebook for artists, basically.
Sure.
They show up all kinds of paintings and stuff. And I was going through some, stuff like that because I was trying to find somebody to do my artwork, because that's one thing I'm not good at. Okay, I can't draw and all that stuff, right? So I saw one of his pictures on there, and I contacted him through email and said, "Hi, my name is Mark. I check out some of your paintings; they're fascinating. Would you be interested in doing some, artwork for an album cover?" And when he wrote me back, I was in shock, because he goes, "Hi, Mark. Yeah, I would be interested. Truth be told, I've never done an album cover in my life." And I was like, "Get out." I'm seriously, I go, "Your artwork is so perfect for album covers. I don't know how you could not have done it up to now." And he goes, "Well, I've done one poster for a music festival before, but that's it." Right. So I said, "You know what? I would love for you to do it." And he goes, "Do you have any ideas of what you want?" And I go, "Sort of, but I'd rather that you just do it yourself." Every single album cover that he's done for me, whether it's this one, whether it's this one, or this one here. Okay, and I'll show this one again one more time, because I think it deserves to be shown again. This one here.
Right. Book 2.
He has done it all. And all the only thing he's ever been told is what the title of the album is. I've given him zero input on it, and every single time he's come back with a piece of art, I was always like, "That's perfect." It's something that I can't explain, that he seems to know just by what I tell him as far as what my lyric ideas are, because I do talk to him about that, like, this is going to be about this.
Sure, you got to give him a couple cookies. Yeah.
Course, right. Like I never tell him what to draw. I just tell him this is what I'm thinking about lyrically in the music and stuff like that. And once he gets those kind of tidbits in his head, then I think the ideas come quicker to him too. Like when I told him that I wrote this album about, based around my father and stuff like that, lo and behold, he put a character there. And the funny thing is, it doesn't look exactly like my father, but there are elements of him that remind me of my father. So without even knowing what my father looked like, he was pretty close, on that. So he is a fantastic guy, fantastic painter. And one thing that I will pat myself a little bit on the back is that after he did a couple of my album covers, he has gotten contacted by many record labels now, Cleopatra Records, and he's done album covers for many tribute records, like the tribute to Pink Floyd, the tribute to Rick Wakeman. He's done all the album covers for him, and I'm very happy for him that he's been able to do it because of that.
Really cool. I had said it earlier, and we talked a little bit about it, but kind of being the central creative figure behind a lot of the albums, obviously the Projekt Gemineye, right? Outside of the art, which we just talked about, and James kind of got your album art kind of on lock. The label, Reficul Records.
Yes.
So I'm assuming like that's your label, right? Is that safe to say? Okay. So it's your label, your music. Yeah, people are helping here and there. I mean, it's not like 100%, right? But when I talked about it and you open about Bandcamp and how important it is, like how important is a vehicle like Bandcamp for an independent artist like you to get your music out there? Because you can source and have like the physical stuff done, but in terms of reaching a larger audience, like is Bandcamp good for it, bad for it, could be better? Tell me about your Bandcamp experience.
Bandcamp has been absolutely fantastic. I think it's been very much a source of importance for my projects. I have gotten so many people involved in my music, like in terms of becoming, supporters. I hate calling people fans. It just, for some reason, bugs me. I always call them supporters. So I got a lot of supporters through it. And the thing is, a lot of people do the same thing that I do, I find, is that I go on Bandcamp, I'll just go down to the bottom and I'll go rock, prog rock, new releases, boom, and they'll show me like 7 pages of stuff that's come out, and I'll check like at least sometimes 5 or 6 bands I've never heard of in my life before on there and listen to some of their music. And many times I have bought CDs, vinyl of bands that I've never heard of like before that day, and then become fans of their music, because that's what I love about Bandcamp. People go on there, you can upload their music, you can hear it, you can sample it, full songs. They're not giving like 10 seconds. It's like full music, right? And then if you like it, then you have an option sometimes to buy, CDs, cassettes, vinyl. People are selling T-shirts, all kinds of stuff. Like I sold my test pressings on there. I've sold posters on there as well. And I've had people from as far as Australia up to Alaska and that have bought my stuff. And it's very important, I find, because a lot of people who get hooked into the Bandcamp thing, that's their enjoyment, is to go and look for stuff. I mean, so many people that have joined my who have added me as an artist onto their list. I go and check their list sometimes, and these people have they've bought like 109 albums through Bandcamp, or 1,000 things they've gotten off of Bandcamp. Like, so these people are serious about music, Sure.
That's awesome. Rounding third, to borrow the baseball expression, I wanted to ask you a couple other things. One, you're talking about potentially 2024 touring. You heard it here first, so. That's a good little nugget for her. I appreciate you. Talking about the label, what other projects, because it's not just Projekt Gemineye. When we were talking about doing this, there was some other stuff in the hopper. Tell me about some of the other artists on the label and maybe some future projects coming up.
Well, December 1st, Joe Bailey, who appeared on a couple of my records, he's like a UK version of me. He does everything himself, all the music, all the singing, everything, and he gets his good friend Steve Holland to do his artwork, so he gets an outside person as well to do his artwork. And he has about 8 or 9 solo albums like under his name, Joe Bailey, out on Bandcamp. And about the 7th album in, I heard him on this show called Check It Out Fridays. It's a music prog music show from England, and they play a lot of prog rock stuff, prog metal stuff, unknown stuff, known stuff as well. And they were focusing and featuring on one of his albums, and I was in the gallery there, the Peanut Gallery, and he was there as well. And I said, I love your record, and we kind of met online and we exchanged song ideas, and he sang on my album. I did a guitar solo on one of his things, and I just loved his stuff. So I ended up signing him to my record label. And one of the first things that he ever did was an album called Ghosts for me. Okay, that's the first thing that he actually did there. As you can see there, my record label there.
Nice.
And it turned out really good. It's an awesome record, this record. And as you can see, his friend Steve did some fantastic work.
Some cool art, yeah,
on the artwork. It's a great booklet inside there as well. So he has an album coming out December 1st. There's a video out right now as well for a song called No Man's Land. So if you go on YouTube and put Joe Bailey No Man's Land, there's a full video that's on there right now. Really great video if you want to check it out. So check it out. And the other thing that's happening is in January, me and Joe have a project that we do together called The Dark Monarchy. And we've done 3 albums already under this name. The first one was just the self-titled one that has this album cover on it. This is me and him both were talking the other day, saying how we had such fond memories of doing this album. It was such a fun record to do together, and such an interesting way to write songs. What we did is we each decide to write, let's say, 4 songs, okay? And he would write the first 3.5 minutes of the song, and once he was done, he would send it to me, and I would conclude it. Okay. Then I would send him 4 of my songs with 3 or 4 minutes of music, and then he would conclude my music. And that's how all the albums were written like that. So that's the first record. The second record that we did together was called All Roads Lead to Rome, right? So this record also turned out really, really good. We're very happy with this one as well. the artwork again is really nicely done by Joe. I'm sorry, by Steve Holland.
Sure.
Great stuff.
Cool, real cool.
So January, we're going to be working on that together. The next album, it's going to be our fourth one. The third album, I have it in the other room. Sorry, I forgot to bring it out here to show you. But yeah, we're going to be working on that. Also, I forgot to mention, 2 or 3 days before December 1st, I'm going to be releasing a digital-only Christmas EP of songs that I'm doing under the Projekt Gemineye. I think I always, almost every single year since I've started Projekt Gemineye, I've done a Christmas EP of songs.
That, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so one I missed last year because I had a lot of stuff on the table. I just didn't have time to do it. But this year I was able to get on it earlier. I started writing it in July, so I would get it done. And so it's going to come out right before December, and I think people are going to like it. I have a Christmas epic, like 11-minute song on this one. So it's going to be. I think it's going to be good. I think people are going to like it. It's 3 songs, but one song is like I said, 10, 11 minutes long. The other one's like 7 minutes. The other one's 5. So it's almost like 30 minutes. It's like a Kiss record from the 70s.
Wow.
30 minutes long. So. Yeah, so I got that going on, and there's still lots to come. Like I said, I have two more Projekt Gemineye albums already in the can that are going to come out next year as well.
Awesome. Well, if anything, I've learned a couple things here. One is you're just creative as hell, and you're making music left, right, and sideways, and so that's awesome. But one thing. So my son's a aspiring guitar player, and I kind of thought as we're talking about it because again, the one-man band thing is really impressive in the sense writing the music, putting the music out, promoting the music, making a point to make sure there's physical media. You're covering all these bases. What's a piece of advice you would give to any aspiring musician? Because it can be a little daunting because obviously the business model of music is always changing and it's a lot different now versus 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago. What's a good piece of advice you can give somebody about picking up the instrument, playing music, stick to your passion? And not to say there's one absolute piece of advice, but what's something that comes to mind that you would impose on younger people who are passionate about music, creative about music, etc.?
I'll give you one word, and I think this is something that is extremely, extremely important to all the things that you mentioned. Patience. Because I think that we live in a generation where people want everything now. I want this now, this now. So, but be patient. Work on your craft. Work on your guitar playing. Work on this and that. Work on your lyric writing. Yeah, and I'll tell. And another important thing too is, in terms of the patience, is that to stay in the game. You will get frustrated sometimes where you're like, oh, nothing's going to work. Oh, I'm trying so hard. Nothing's happening. Be patient. There have been so many times I've heard, and myself included, where because I didn't stop and I kept doing my things and I kept putting stuff out and I kept playing and was doing things that eventually you will get seen by somebody. It's just a matter of if you're patient enough to stay long enough in the game to get seen, because that's the thing that people don't realize, is that record people are all the same. They want to see how serious you are about it. Don't forget, if you want them to invest in you or to put money behind you, they have to know that you're serious about this. Not that some guy who's going to stop doing it at the drop of a hat. Sure. If you're sitting there doing it for like many years and you're constantly doing it, and you're still battling and pushing through, and they see that you're putting an effort into it, your time will come. I've seen so many times where bands have decided, okay, that's it, I'm done. We tried this for 4 years, it didn't work out. And you know what? If they maybe waited maybe another year, so who knows what could have happened? And it's happened so many times. Look, I've been in situations where we were in bands where they're like, I don't know how this is going so well, but we waited, we gutted it out, and we had our chance, and we made sure that we were ready for it. And things happen. And that's the thing. Right now, especially, there's no reason why you can't be at least moderately successful on your own, because the internet gets you in front of way more people than it did when I started playing. To get in front of this many people back in my day, you have to get a major label release to have that happen. And you'd have to be in every kind of magazine, be played on radio and stuff like that. Now there's internet radio. Now there's virtual online magazines. You can send stuff
direct to consumer. Yeah.
You can directly send all your music to the magazine people. They can hear it within an hour of talking to you, or even less, and they can review it within a couple of days, and it's up. So there's so many advantages now. You just have to stay patient and stay in the game.
Well, it reminds me, there's this famous quote that Bryan Cranston, who played Walter White on Breaking Bad, I forget where I heard it. I think he was doing an interview, and he talked about, because he was a guy that he didn't get his break until later in his career. I think he was in his 40s when he got like Malcolm in the Middle, and then that led to Breaking Bad. But there was 4 things that he said, and I always remember this, and when you're talking about it, is exactly on point. He said, you got to have talent, which, either you're born with it, or some people can, through hard work, really create a skill. You got to have luck. Sometimes you create your own luck. You just have to be in the right place, right time. But you have to be out. But the other 2 is exactly what you're talking about: is patience and persistence.
Yeah.
Because you can't get too discouraged when things aren't going your way, but you got to be persistent, and you got to just keep grinding. You got to pick up the guitar every day. You got to try to learn something new every week. You got to, so exactly what you're talking about, Mark, it just made me think about it. So that's a successful guy. Here's another successful guy. So what do you say? Maybe they know what they're talking about, folks. I don't know.
Yeah, well, awesome. I mean, I'd like to think I have some idea of what's going on.
Good stuff. Well, Mark Anthony K, Projekt Gemineye, it's been a pleasure talking to you again. Thanks again for the KISS Roundtable effort we did not too long ago, and I hope this isn't the last time we have you on the podcast, because I really like learning about not only what you're up to, but just a wealth of knowledge of self-producing, making your own music. And this music, it's clear, it's evident that you love music. And I always like talking with people who are passionate about not only what they do, but also what they like talking about. You know what I mean? And so that shines through. So, Mark, appreciate it. Thanks so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
And that was another trip around the turntable. Thanks for listening to Vinyl Community Podcasts.